We're happy to have with us Dr. Yvette Mere-Cook from Boise State University's College of Education. Dr. Mere-Cook's presentation is titled STEM Drives Progress: Practical Approaches on Integrating STEM to Address IEP Goals.
Welcome to this presentation, STEM Drives Progress: Practical Approaches on Integrating STEM to Address IEP Goals. My name is Yvette Mere-Cook, and I'm thrilled to be part of STEMIEFest 2020. During today's presentation, I'm going to highlight my work in inclusive early childhood STEM education. I hope you come away with an understanding of STEM as it relates to child development and learning, an appreciation for the importance of integrating STEM for all children, but especially our children with disabilities, an insight into how most, if not all, of your child's IEP goals can be addressed through participation and engagement in STEM investigations, and practical strategies to implement STEM in the classroom that include planning lessons, introducing STEM topics, and partnering with families so that your child's IEP goals can be addressed across environments. So why STEM, and why do young children and young children with disabilities need to engage in STEM investigations? To answer this question, we need to define and understand what is STEM in early childhood. STEM is an approach to learning that places children's curiosities and inquiries at the center of their learning. Investigations either start with a question to answer, a problem to solve, or a phenomenon to explore. And children use questions, observations, exploration to learn about the world around them. This is what young children do. We define technology as any tool that helps a child explore. Take, for instance, this stick. This is considered technology, a tool that this child's using to dig in the mud. We also think about math in terms of not just numbers and counting, but we help children explore those patterns that exist in nature. And patterns in music. After all, a song is just a simple algorithm. I'm going to be showing you this video clip to illustrate this point. While you watch this teacher set up this investigation based on her infant's interest in sounds, I want you to think about all the different developmental domains that this teacher is promoting.
The teacher had started an investigation into sound, having students pat drums, different types of drums, and using everyday items to make different sounds on the drums. Today, she added a new sound, a wind chime. See how these infants observe, explore, and test out this new sound. Is it moving? You're making it move. You're making it move with your fingers. Is that a sound? Oh, where'd the sound go? Where did the sound go? Oh no. What did the sound? Changed. Oh, you figured it out.
As you can see, this young child solved the problem of making the wind chime work after he got it all tangled up. And young children explore their environment and explore their curiosities every day. Except for our young children with disabilities, they often don't have the access or the opportunity to engage in STEM investigations. Early childhood special education does focus on explicit instruction and adult-directed tasks. However, with this next video clip that I'm going to show you, If you infuse the instructional supports and the evidence-based practices within STEM investigations, young children can not only make progress on their IEP goals, they can meet them. So in our inclusive preschool classroom, we implemented the engineering design process within the classroom, and we used We Engineer to get us started. We Engineer is the preschool part of the Engineering as Elementary curriculum published by the Museum of Science in Boston. So we had one child who she would not really enter play with anyone. She preferred to play by herself in our inclusive classroom. And so we were working on the goal of her entering group play and initiating verbal exchanges with adults and peers. We then also noticed that she would never join us during center time. She tended to stay at the snack table and eat very slowly and pick at her food rather than participate in those activities. So this was another one of our goals for her. So as you watch this video, I want you to take note of the goals that we had for her, as well as notice her engagement and participation and joy. We are doing the raft challenge, which is part of We Engineer.
What happened to it? It went down. That's right, you were telling me it went down. I wonder what would happen if you turned it over. It still sinks. Oh. What happened? I can't really come back up. Tatum, did you see that? Did you see what happened with the phone? Yay! Yay! You want to show Tatum? Okay, I see that. Wow! The felt comes back up. The pine cone hero. Oh my goodness! Look at Hattie's. Dionysus, how is Hattie's different? Uh-oh, what happened? Hattie? It sunk. I'm crushed. Okay, the color tape, trying it again. Dionysus, she's trying it again. That's what you're going to do. Hattie, did it work? Minus a pilot ship. Oh my goodness. Like a sail. Hattie, it floats now.
So as you can see, she definitely initiated with peers, she definitely initiated with adults, and she couldn't be more engaged as she persisted and improved on her raft to make it float. So this is the power of STEM, and it really is a vehicle to drive progress on IEP goals. So how do you get started? How do we actually get this into our classrooms? So the key word is intentionality, planning with intention. The environment, materials, and your data collection or your monitoring of those IEP goals. But to set you up for success in order to be able to do all this planning is, number one, assemble a team. Draw on your paraprofessionals, draw on your librarian to help you get fiction and nonfiction books on certain topics, and then engage your parents. Parents are more than willing to partner with you on doing things that really challenge and enrich their child's educational experiences. Two, choose an investigation that's based on children's interests. So the teacher who, with the infants, really noticed that they were very into sounds. Use existing resources as well. So we used We Engineer. STEMI is also coming out with some resources for early childhood educators. So look for those evidence-based resources as well. And then traditional classroom themes. So this picture that I show is, children exploring outside, and they found a worm that had no legs, and then another bug, a little beetle that did have legs, and they were talking about that. So we created a theme and an investigation all around bugs, and we were comparing different types of bugs, and that lasted for quite several weeks. The third strategy for success is to integrate this into existing routines. Introduce topics during story time with those fiction and nonfiction books. Discuss and ask questions, open-ended questions during your circle or class meeting, and then really use your center times to have the exploration and into different topics happen. In terms of intentionally planning the environment, you want to really have enough physical space where children could lay on the floor, they can walk around. As you can see, we had a child who really preferred to draw or journal while laying on his tummy on the floor, having different stations. So we had a word wall in our circle time area where if any of us heard a child using a word, or if a child had a question, or if we used a juicy word like compare or experiment, we would put it up on the word wall and then we would describe it. The third part about setting up the environment is really embedding all of those supports that your children need in order to access the curriculum you're using. So any evidence-based practices with respect to peer modeling, with respect to communication, PECs, if your child needs to use an iPad to communicate, or icons, having those already part of your STEM investigation time. And then the last one is just time. It takes some children a little bit longer to warm up to an activity or to start their investigation. I'm doing distance learning right now, and during our STEM time last week, I had a couple of children dive in and start building right away. But then I had a child who I could see going in and out of his parents' room, and he didn't start right away. And I thought, oh, he's not going to participate today. But he did end up, after about 5 to 10 minutes, coming in and actually building with us. And he had taken different materials from other parts of the house to make his creation. And so that brings us to materials. Everyday items, I feel, work the best. Recyclables, we ask parents to collect them during this distance learning time, but we were having parents bring in different recyclables. We have children in their outdoor walks come and gather leaves or sticks or anything that they could use in their investigations. You saw the child who was trying to see if a pine cone floated. The other thing that we use quite a bit is books, fiction and nonfiction. And I can't emphasize enough that having both is really important to set the scene for a particular topic. Right now, I'm having parents use books as a preview to our STEM time. I find that students get really excited and start to get exposed to some of the vocabulary that we're using with respect to our STEM investigation when they have that time to preview books. I'm using read-alouds right now with my students' families because some of our libraries don't have, they're not accessible in terms of the hours are very limited right now. Access to real tools. With supervision, of course, we're able to have hot glue tools for children to use with supervision, as well as we had a teacher bring in her sewing machine, and children really got excited about seeing the real tool, using it, and they really respected the expectations and rules around that. So again, a wonderful thing in terms of tying that to a self-regulation goal on a child's IEP of just it really helps to promote that. And then journals for home. We had journals for students in the classroom, but also having them have that journal, a separate journal for home. We had one child who wanted to write everything that they were going to test out with the sink or float the next day. And they wanted to write all the words. And so this is a great example of, if you have a writing goal for a child, how that the parents could be working on that and tying that to something that's happening in the classroom. And lastly, really taking the time and planning on when am I going to observe this STEM time so that I can complete my progress monitoring in their IEP goals. And I would really recommend using existing systems and your personnel. So maybe having the paraprofessionals set up the STEM investigation while you you progress monitor the different goals that you're looking at, inviting maybe the speech therapist and the occupational therapist to do their progress monitoring during STEM time is also a recommendation. And then I wanted to highlight this last goal that ties into this theme of how STEM drives IEP progress. So here's a child who was working on building vocabulary. So building new vocabulary words was one of his goals. And he uses the word energy in this video clip that I'm going to show you. And had we not been using STEM as the context for our centers, I'm not sure if we would have ever heard him use this word. And he was describing and asking if energy was what was making the hot glue tool work.
Is there energy in there?
So again, this is a pretty quick clip, but it shows you that he's using the word energy and he's thinking about what is making that glue melt. And it's such a wonderful example of the power of STEM in early childhood. So thank you so much for attending this presentation. I look forward to the Q&A as well, and I do have additional resources and references and image references for you as well. But yes, I look forward to the Q&A, and thank you so much for your engagement and your participation.
Now it's time for Q&A. Dr. Yvette Mere-Cook, EDD, from Boise State University's College of Education, will be answering questions about her presentation, STEM Drives Progress, Practical Approaches on Integrating STEM to Address IEP Goals. Dr. Shoen Yang is the moderator.
What a lovely presentation, Yvette. So, Yvette, I have some questions for you. So when we talk about IEP, many people probably only think about fine motor, gross motor, or families will only think about language, pre-academic skills. So I was wondering how can we address the connections between STEM learning and other developmental areas with families? Do you have any strategy that you used? And can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Well, parents are always really concerned with their children's IEP goals and how those are going to be addressed in the context of their educational setting. And we really emphasize, as partners with them, the role of the school-to-home connection as well. So especially now with distance, so many people in distance learning, we're really emphasizing everyday experiences and how those tie into STEM learning and how those tie into their child's IEP goals. So, for example, I have parents do sensory walks with their children. So lots of families are going out for walks right now together and having children pick up different items that they see and then taking them home, and how can they use them? Do they put them in water? Do they put them and hide them in their bean pit? And then I show parents how when children are really interested in what they're doing, they're going to do more things like commenting. So oftentimes with the children that I work with, one of the expressive language goals is that they comment on things, and that helping parents see how they can narrate that to, it feels bumpy. And then I feel like this context as well helps families learn the importance of free exploration for young children. And this is true for young children with and without disabilities. It's just oftentimes parents of children with disabilities have so many things that they have to do, and so many instructional practices that they have to put in place and schedules to keep, that I ask them to schedule some exploration time really based on what their child likes to do. And we see a lot of engagement, and we see the child from multiple perspectives, but from my particular perspective, a sensory perspective, really sort of relax and really be able to explore their environment. And that's the perfect time when their bodies are regulated, where you can try to work on some of this reciprocal social interaction, this expressive language that is usually so much of a part of a child's IEP.
Okay, thank you, Yvette. That's a really great answer. And then we also have questions from the participant, and I think it's about having the topics and materials. Like, do you model how to use the materials, or just let them explore and see what happens? Like the sink and flow. I think she's talking about the video. Like, how do the kids know how when to put the phone on the boat? So, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So in terms of the materials to explore, we had them all laid out for children. And then we also encourage children to walk around the classroom and walk around the outdoor time and grab materials to experiment with. And this lasted an entire center time. So we'd have different materials on different tables to encourage children to try different things. And then they just put it in the water, and they were commenting to each other, does it stay up? Does it drop down? I'm doing a similar activity with students that I work with over distance learning this week. And I asked parents to just have your child have a variety of items. And I gave suggestions of what I was going to bring to our STEM time. And I had students bring a variety of items. One child brought a pencil, which I don't know why. I just didn't think about bringing a pencil. And so he showed us that, it floated. And so then I pulled out my popsicle stick and I asked, what do you think this is going to do? Do you think this will sink or float? And I put it in my bin and it floated. And then the child who brought the pencil was like, it floated because it's wood. And this is a child who's had a really difficult time engaging with the computer and engaging over distance learning. And it was just so amazing to hear him not just comment, but make the connections that, a pencil's made of wood, a popsicle stick is made of wood. That's why it's going to float. And I felt like that was such a great example. And Mom was so surprised. And it really did help him then connect with his other peers. And he actually asked one of his peers, what did he bring?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Yvette. And we also have another question. The participants talking about, I love using STEM activities to build connection and social emotional skills, and also motor, executive function, and problem solving. But one of the things that he or she is struggling with is explaining the importance of STEM and integrating it throughout the early childhood program, and having developmentally appropriate activities to help with the IEP goals. to colleagues who do not understand early childhood development and education. So my students, parents tend to grasp the idea and run with them, but therapists and administration do not get it. What advice do you have for addressing this?
Well, I think that especially if you're trying to discuss the effectiveness with administrators, using your data and using observations and documentation. So really looking at a child's IEP goals and comparing it to, when they're engaged in a STEM investigation, how does their engagement and participation differ? How much prompting, and so taking the specific data that you would do normally, but you're comparing two different contexts, and how much prompting does that child need to transition, to engage, to maybe interact with a peer or with an adult, and compare that to maybe some other center activities that not necessarily aren't preferred, but don't allow for that freedom of exploration. So the video clip of the young girl who was doing her raft investigation, this was a child who would not reference peers. And you see her looking at her classmate and go, look what I did, right? And so I think because she was really engrossed and really interested in the activity, we were able to see some of those things come out. And again, pictures, video, if you're able to have the consent to do that, really also show people how powerful this could be. And so I think kind of using that data of progress monitoring, typically people will see what you mean when you're doing that.
Okay. Thank you, Yvette. So in the presentation, you talk about the putting the words on the wall idea. So can you tell us a little bit more, what kind of a STEM words that did you use, and did you have any resource about that, or did you use any visual to help with children's learning? Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
So one of the aspects of our STEM investigations was to really look at that scientific vocabulary. And, children who maybe have issues with articulation and with expressive language may not be able to say these words, but by us being able to expose them to it, they're understanding the concepts. And so what we did is that we did put the actual word on the word wall. And then what we would do is we would talk about it as a group, and we would show examples of what that meant. So compare or experiment were a lot of the words that we kept sort of showing. We did use icons for some of those concepts, and we tried to put some of those icons around the room, or for children who needed a communication board, either on an iPad or on a PEX binder that they had, we would try to have some of these words there. And we try to vary nouns as well as verbs, because we know that children need exposure to both types of language, both the verbs and the nouns.
Okay, thank you. So when you talk about using the example to explain about the meaning of compare, can you tell us a little bit more, are you modeling, or are you using a real life item to show what's compare? So can you tell us a little bit more?
Sure. So I'm not saying to children, oh, let's compare these two things. But I'm showing them, and I'm asking that open-ended question of, what do you think is going to happen if we put, this object? So yesterday we were using big cotton balls and little cotton balls. And I said, what do you think is going to happen if we have this one and this one? And how are these different? And some children are able to articulate that. Some children, what we would do is I put both cotton balls in the water, and I would just narrate and describe, wow, the big one is soaking up water faster than the little one. And so I would describe it that way. And then I'll ask parents to continue with that exploration, maybe do that again and show them, or use a soft object versus a hard object. So comparing the properties. So we don't necessarily just use the language. We use physical modeling. We use actual demonstrations, and then we ask parents to follow up with it as well.
Okay, thank you. So you also talk about like right now you also work with students in a distance learning environment, right? So can you tell us a little bit more like how do you support and facilitate STEM learning in a remote learning environment? I think that there's a lot of participants want to know about this, especially in this pandemic. So if you can share some of your experience or strategy to encourage STEM learning in a virtual environment, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah. So we use sort of a 3-step approach when we're setting up an investigation through this distance learning, because we really do need parents to have the materials and help their children gather the materials for our investigation. So number one, I'll put out a little video showing parents, hey, this is what we're going to do in our group this next week. And I always try to give it to them by either Thursday or Friday, so they have a weekend to, gather up these materials. And then I give them links to books to preview just some of the concepts of what we're going to be talking about. So a few weeks ago, we did an investigation around wind. And so I gave them a couple of stories that use wind as one of the main features of the story, as well as a nonfiction book about wind. Because what I realize is that children do really like to look at the pictures, to think about it. I show parents how you could use read alouds, because our libraries here have very limited hours and you can't just go in and get a book. You really have to plan weeks in advance. So I try to find things that also have a read aloud attached, and I'll show parents over this video how to pause the video and maybe point out different things to the child, and then just let them have access to that for a few days. So that's we do a lot of front loading that way. And then during the group, I'll encourage families to come and participate. And if the child is just observing, because I do have some families who they'll log into the group, but they don't have any materials. And I say, that's fine. And I try to engage the child with what does so-and-so have? Or what did Billy bring for our for our wind? Like, how do you think that's going to make this ball move? So I will engage children who don't have the material still in thinking and looking at what's happening. And then I always have my materials out so that I'm able to also model and show the children what they're doing. Because some families will put the video on and then they'll walk away. So I'm just left with the child. So I always make sure I have my own materials. So even if they're not doing it, they engage in it. And then I always send a follow-up video, because undoubtedly I've learned from the children themselves. So like the pencil. And so I said to parents, if you're in bath time, have a pen and a pencil and see what happens, right? So allow them to sort of take what we did in group and infuse it into an everyday routine.
Thank you. So we have a question from a participant. I think she's wondering if any coding, programming, or robotic activities are also incorporated in your STEM program. So can you tell us a little bit more about this? Thank you.
Yeah. So I with this group in distance learning right now, we haven't yet gotten to coding or to a robotics yet. For a couple of different reasons, but a lot of it is we're trying to focus on tools that parents would have at home that we can incorporate. So we haven't used that yet, but in part of our STEM project that we did at Boise State with the funding from the Idaho STEM Action Center, we did do a robotics unit with a preschool classroom. And it didn't have the proportion of children with disabilities as other classrooms did at Boise State Children's Center, but we were able to do that. And we really came up with, at the time we were using this robotics program, we were asking children about, Chinese New Year and the Lunar New Year. And so we were able to sort of create a dance by using the robot. And the children created the dragon, and they also created the dance moves. And we were able to program it using simple coding blocks, so a screen-free coding robotic system. So we have done that. I haven't done that with my current students.
Oh, that sounds interesting. I was kind of like, when you were talking, I was kind of picturing, how it would look like.
Well, and even with that investigation, we tied it to a story as well, so that we're able to, we tied it to calendar time, we tied it to a story. We used gross motor movements of moving forward and back and turning around, which both are gross motor. But as an OT, you also have to plan your motions. So there's motor planning. And then there's also quite a bit of language because of those directional vocabulary words of forward, back, around. So we did use that, but that was something that robotics program was quite expensive. And it's something that I would love to implement when we're back face to face, and maybe have my parents sort of support us by reading the books, and maybe we can check out the robot to different families.
Yeah, I love the example. Yeah, I can't wait to see like when the time is allowed that we can go back to face to face, and you showed us more example and wonderful videos. So in the presentation, you also talk about writing IEP goals by connecting STEM. So, and you also showed us like a wonderful table of the IEP goal monitoring progress. So can you tell us a little bit more about this and give us some examples or your experience in connecting IEP goals with STEM?
Yeah, so I actually feel like STEM investigations, no matter what the topic is, just lend themselves well to targeting various different goals that we see in a child's IEPs, from expressive language to receptive language to social emotional development. Now, that said, it doesn't mean that just having children explore and create or investigate or explore a phenomenon is going to be enough. Those instructional supports still need to be there. And just like with any activity that you would do with a child, if you're trying to create peer-to-peer interaction and to foster those friendships, we've noticed that you do need teachers to intentionally set up the environment to create that collaboration. Asking a child, well, look at what Johnny did. What do you think? What would happen if you incorporated some of those materials in your creation? And why don't you go ask Johnny what? So you do have to facilitate some of those goals that you're working towards. But setting up an investigation in this way that gives children this freedom within a structure of a STEM investigation definitely lends itself to working on these goals in a much more robust way. And again, as an occupational therapist, there's so much fine motor planning, sensory experiences that children are doing, and they have a meaning to the child. So like I can do a center where we're doing Play-Doh and doing different shapes and cutting it with scissors, but I'm creating, or I have my goals in mind. The children don't really know how this connects to what they want to do. So STEM investigations allow you to capitalize on those interests and have children actually engage in something that has meaning to them. And because you're able to do things in different ways, you'll get a little bit of a window as to how they're thinking about things.
Okay. Thank you. And we know, like in the presentation, you talk about STEM as a vehicle to drive the progress of the IEP goals, right? So I was wondering, during your experience in working in a STEM program and connecting STEM with IEP, what other challenges do you face when you're trying to connect STEM with the IEP goals, and then how you solve these challenges, solve these issues?
So the challenges, when we were working in the inclusive preschool classroom, all of our children who had IEPs also attended a developmental preschool. And so the challenge was to, as one of the questions sort of alluded to as well, is to get these types of investigations infused into other parts of their educational world. So crossing contexts was a little bit difficult. We were very fortunate that we had a strong parent communication piece, and We Engineer certainly has like parent resources, and they, recommend you have a STEM bag, and you give that, you share that across the different families. We were lucky enough to be funded by Idaho STEM Action Center that we were able to, for every investigation, send home a STEM bag. So we had a strong parent to child communication. I'm finding the work I'm doing currently with families, it's hard because everybody has different time constraints, different schedules, and different materials and access to materials in order to really cut across what we're doing in our group to the home environment. So that is, I think, one of the most difficult things, is to have children really be able to do this in different aspects of their days and different aspects of their lives. And it's not just something that's an OT group.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That is wonderful. Thank you, Yvette. So I guess another questions I have is about, so a lot of people, not many people will probably think when children are doing STEM activities, sometimes it will cause their frustrations or challenging behavior. So have you had any experience about that and how you address this?
Well, that was something that I have to admit, when we were embedding the engineering design process in our inclusive preschool classroom, that's one of the things that before we implemented it, we were very nervous about, because we had a number of children who would become frustrated if things didn't go right. Mm-hmm. And what was really interesting is that all the children really saw things not working. We don't like to use the word failure, but those failures as just part of the process. So okay, so I created something, it didn't work, so now I have to improve upon it. And the little girl that you saw who was improving upon her, that was really surprising, that that's how she reacted to her raft just sinking. Because prior to that, if something didn't work out or she was a little bit scared to try something new, she would just not participate. So just having that talk that is part of the process really was surprisingly powerful, that students do just see those types of, when things don't work, I have to improve upon it as part of the process. And we didn't see those frustrations. I think that what I like to do in my groups is I like to model when something doesn't work. And I'll be honest, sometimes I'm like, I know this isn't going to work, but I'm going to model it so they can see and I can model that reaction. But then sometimes things actually surprise me that they don't work. And so we get to say, wow, I'm really surprised that didn't work. What could we do to make, we were doing a little boat with tinfoil and it sunk. And I'm very surprised. Like, what could we do? Maybe I should, and I would compare and what another child did, where they did the walls much higher. And so I'll, say, well, I'm going to make mine high like that, and I'm going to try it again. So I model to them, if something doesn't work, how can we improve upon it and then make it work? So I think that that's a real critical piece of it. And I do think that had we sort of allowed our fears of, oh my gosh, if something fails, they're not going to be able to handle it, we wouldn't have seen like how children really do just see these improvements as part of the natural process of designing something to solve a problem.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Like adults' intentionality and the intentional teaching to support those social emotional skills are really important as well. I guess our time is running off. So thank you, Yvette. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. And I hope I hope the participants enjoy the rest of the STEMIEFest. We still have a STEMIEFest tomorrow. So feel free to come back, and thank you so much.
And I do want to just, before people go, I do want to just say that A video about how we did the robotics is a part of all those videos and resources are on the slides that were attached to this presentation. So definitely you'll get more information and see how we structured that as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Yvette.